Nathan, welcome. This is so
Hi,
cool.
it is.
From the land down under. So happy to have you here. And I just want to say, first of all, and I think I've mentioned this in comments before too, but your fiction and the characters that you develop, they have this power over your readers. And I know I'm not the only one because I've read this in comments, but you pull us in with like within two lines. And all I can hope is that I can deliver today and ask you questions that do the same, because something about your language and the worlds that you create really open up portals for us. So my goal today is that somehow we get to kind of peer into the heart of Nathan and learn a little bit more about your experience as a writer. So
Well, thank you. Feel incredibly honored for this. I don't feel worthy. You know,
yeah.
I, it's weird for me to think back on already the journey that has been, publishing on Substack for the last year and a half for me, and never thought I'd be sitting here being interviewed by someone like you. So I really appreciate it and you reaching out. And for anyone listening, I'm definitely nervous about this because I was just saying that to Kimberly that I'm far more comfortable writing words than I am speaking them. So I'm going to apologize in advance if I
Ah,
bumble over things.
well, and like I said to you, I am the same way. So we're in the same boat. So let's just like invent our own language today. How
Great,
about?
great. Sounds good.
So I kind of want to start not from the beginning, like when you were born, but I know that you relocated. And for me, sometimes part of the messiness of life involves kind of needing a hard reset. And we know often when that is in our life. Maybe there's a couple of them in our lives. In your case, you decided to exit the UK and start something completely new in Australia. I kind of want to know a little bit about this reset. Anything you want to share about it and how that's been important for you?
Yeah, I think reset is definitely the right word to use to describe that. I'd spent 3.5-ish years doing a PhD in sort of immunology science, cancer immunology, viral immunology, and that was really tough. I think anyone who goes to a PhD has a tough time. I think
Mhm.
that's part of what it's meant to be.
Yeah.
And it was also the end of a fairly long-term relationship at the time as well, and I'd kind of found myself transitioning into another relationship, and it was just, I think I needed that fresh start. I wanted to explore, I wanted to travel, and I got lucky. I think is really the best way I can describe it in terms of being offered a position over in Melbourne in Australia, and I just
Mm.
kind of went for it. And it's weird. I've been thinking back on this quite a lot lately because as I'm aging, you start to hit those milestones, and particularly with how long, it's been over 15 years since I moved, and I think with every 5-year increment, I do reflect on it a bit, and it's a surreal thing to think back on that move now for me,
Mm.
because I don't know if I'd do it now. I
Yeah.
I I think I was early mid 20s, and it was just an easy thing to go, sure, let's go for it and see what happens. And I'm obviously so glad I did.
Yeah.
It was to the genuinely life changing for me, and met
Yeah.
my now wife over in Australia, and
Wow.
um, yeah, it was a time when I needed just a fresh start and to a hard reset. I think
Hmm.
it's the only real way I can describe it, and I was just willing to do it. And that disastrous relationship turned into another one that
Hmm.
didn't end all so well and kind of battered me around a fair bit. But it was, yeah, it's what you look back on life, and you there are those seminal moments and important moments,
Hmm.
and that's obviously a big one there. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's gotten
Relationships.
to your question.
Yeah, no, it does. And relationships tend to kind of drag us around the planet sometimes. I was just thinking as you were talking, I moved to Australia for a
Yeah.
year
Oh,
to be in a
awesome.
relationship. And, at the same, similar to you, I was young in my 20s and I'm thinking now, would I have ever done that now?
Yeah.
No way. But I think those are, like you said, pivotal moments in our lives and life changing. So it sounds like the Nathan in the UK was very different than the current Nathan.
Yeah, definitely. I think, am a slow bloomer. I think we've had those comments before about this, and or late bloomer, I should say. And I was still finding myself back then. And I guess that's normal. I think maybe it happens to different people at different stages, but
Yeah.
I was definitely a different person. And I think part of this reflection I've been doing is just wondering, that those forking paths that are always occurring in life, where I would be now had I stayed, and what would my happiness level be? What would I have
Mhm.
pursued? And you obviously can't answer those questions,
Yeah.
but I do know that it was part of shaping me in moving out here. So yeah,
Yeah. I wanted to actually go over to that slow bloomer. I actually like slow bloomer versus late bloomer because
yeah,
late implies that it's somehow a negative.
uh-huh,
But I'm going with the slow.
yep, I
And I
like it.
completely relate to that too. And I think you wrote somewhere or you mentioned that you feel like you actually discovered your soul in your 30s. And I want to know, everyone probably has a version of that, but, and they know what they mean by it, but what do you mean by discovering your soul in your 30s?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer your excellent questions. Uh,
It doesn't have
I
to be
th-
deep. I mean, just like first thing that comes off the top of your head.
yeah, it's an ongoing thing. I think for me it's self-awareness, right? It's part of I had a great childhood. I really can't say anything really negative about my childhood and upbringing, but I will say that I was pretty reserved in my ambitions and really coherently thinking about the future. And I think I kind of just went with what felt right. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I've always subscribed to this, maybe not fate, but this notion that you can feel out luck in life and you can
Mm,
know what decisions feel right and don't feel right. And that can help guide you.
mhm.
And I think a lot of my childhood and my teens was kind of just subconsciously going with the flow and
Yep.
being a little bit, I don't know, if I was to go back, I think I'd be a bit more um self-motivated about what I was doing and what my goals
Mm,
were. And I think it was only really meeting my wife and her influence, because she's a great philosophizer and
mhm.
psychologist and thinks so in depth about everything going on, that brought that aspect out of me, I think, and I started to be a lot more present in my thinking in my 30s, and just self-aware of everything.
Yeah.
And I think that to me gets to that soul aspect of being internally reflective, I suppose.
I love that answer. It's such a, it's accessible, I mean, it doesn't have sort of this terminology attached to it that is like, well, what does that mean? How do I, it's like, it's just a presence with oneself and an awareness of the inner workings and the relations that come from that. And I'm also similar to you in that I feel like I look back on life, childhood, and I was just kind of bopping around and not really strategizing even my life,
Yeah,
just
yeah, that's a good term. Yeah.
going with whatever happens. And you kind of get those gut feelings like, oh, I'm going to go to Australia or whatever.
Hmm.
But it didn't have this ownership almost
Yeah.
of like, oh, this is what I love and this is what I want. Um, I really appreciate that answer, and it obviously is coming out in your writing. Um, So let's talk a lot about your writing.
Okay.
um, you first started to write under a different surname, and I know you kind of live you straddle these two different existences, career paths, and I'd like to hear a little bit about your choice to write under a different surname at first.
Yeah, I mean it's something that was an instant choice for me when I started my Substack, writing under Nathan Slake. And I realize looking at the screen now that I've only written Nathan, so we'll leave
Yeah.
that ambiguity there by not adding my surname.
Keep it going.
Uh, yeah, it was an easy choice for me because I'd dabbled with writing and I'd written things for me and shared a bit. Looking back on those, pretty amateurish, I think, obviously, which is always going to be the case. Um, but I have this duality in my life for sure when it comes to work, and it was pure cowardice and fear, I think, writing under a pseudonym when I started my Substack, because I just wanted to keep that part of me separate. And if Joe listens to this, she's gonna laugh because I fret. I tell her, how much I worry about people at work knowing that I do this, because when I'm at work, and I guess if anyone's worked in an office environment or similar where you're around colleagues that they are your friends. Some of them are close friends. Others are very much just a professional relationship. There is this kind of boundary there, and I think some people are quite comfortable just being open about their private lives and what they do. Other people are a bit more reserved. And I think for me, I don't know, science and writing, even though writing is inherent to science, but creative writing, it just feels like my brain thinks that people at work will just look at it and go, "What are you doing? I don't understand why you're doing this."
Yeah,
And there's
yeah.
also some reservation that I don't want to give away pieces of my internalization in that
Hmm.
regard. And so I feel naturally far more comfortable at the moment, at least, writing under I have my picture on there, so you kind of would be able to
Yeah,
know it's me if you thought it might be me. But discoverability wise, or if someone stumbles upon me online randomly, there's not that connection.
yeah.
I Yeah, it's at least at the moment, it's still that sense of there's always. I mean, I've struggled with imposter syndrome my whole life, and that I don't think that's
Hmm.
ever going to go away. Um, but I think writing for me is the most true to myself that I can be, and I love that. I really do. But there's this automatic protection barrier that comes down at the moment for me, where if I'm willing to share, even though I'm writing mostly fiction, um, I just want that slight disconnect still.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the best
I
way I can describe that, I think.
It makes a lot of sense to me the way you described it, Nathan, because I mean, it sounds precious. This writing life for you is very, dare I even say, sacred. It's like
Mm,
this space for you that you don't want to bring it to show and tell. You want to keep it, in a special box and open it up when you come home. And I think I don't know if there's anything that sort of necessitates that you do share it with the other world,
yeah,
because it's something that might always need to be private. And I mean, it's not private in the sense that you're sharing it on Substack, and so you're building a community over here
yeah,
with us. But I I would feel tentative about sharing something like that too, because I want it to stay precious, and the
yeah,
world is
yeah,
messy and mean.
yeah, yeah. But I think, the flip side of that, though, I mean, as you just said, an important point, the community on Substack is incredible. Like, I've been in, I've dabbled on online communities and things like Reddit and stuff, but there is something wonderful, at least our corner that I experience, the fiction side and and a few others. The community is wonderful, and I really applaud you, Kimberly, for your memoir, which is just mind blowing. Because you're bearing your soul on there, right?
Yeah.
And it's it to me, something like that feels more important, that it's truly you that I'm reading. And I have a lot of respect for what you did with that. It's
Mm,
if anyone hasn't read it and happens to be listening to this, you really must read it. So
thank you. I had to, it was one of those things where I had to share it.
yep,
It got to
yeah,
that point where I had been carrying it inside of me for so long that part of my identity was like my own coming out party.
yeah.
It's like, I need to claim myself in the world. And part of that was having a voice. Um, so you've been such a wonderful part of that community as I started sharing it last year. So, and one of the things that, everybody, we're all different, and we write differently on Substack, but there are some themes that come through. And one of them I recognize with you, and some of the other writers is, and you described it as slow reading. And I had never heard of this phrase before. And it's like, that's it. That's exactly what I love. And from my understanding, it's about savoring not just the story, but the plot, and how it's crafted. And, your
Yeah.
prose is just invites me to reread and slow down. And I even in, your little essays about coffee in the morning, where you're not even writing fiction, you're just kind of burying your soul a little bit. There's the way you craft your sentences is just tasty. So is this a deliberate decision, or have you kind of always been that type of writer?
I No, definitely not. It's just something I think it's something that's emerged in since I've been writing regularly. And I have to, I suppose, thank my own stupid self-imposed deadlines of trying to write once a week to establish this rhythm over the last year and a half. And I, I've always been a big reader, but I used to read primarily for plot, for story, for characters, to just go with the ride. But I think internalizing and thinking and knowing that deep down what I really love and really want to be doing more full time is writing has made me, and again, being a slow bloomer to the world of sort of literary fiction, everything that I read now in books, I'm far more analytical in the way that I approach reading. Not in a sort of criticism sort of way, but I love reading now to dissect how an author is able to convey what they convey. And there are just some writers who I just love because of their prose, and trying to kind of analyze how they do that fascinates me. And I think that's part of what slowed me down in my reading, just to savor and enjoy sentences and paragraphs, and the magic that can be possible with the arrangement of words. And I love this idea that the kind of the flavor that you can get from a sentence that you
Yeah.
just can't get through any other medium. As much as I love other mediums, it's to me that's something that has only really become apparent properly to me in the last couple of years. And I think since I've been writing, it's really what I'm striving for. I think everyone wants to craft their own style, I suppose. And for me, it's that, I will labor over a sentence for stupid amounts of time. And I think no more so than in the Cernox, which, I still I still hold very, very dear to me, because I don't know where that story came from and I don't know how it came out, but it came out at a time, and that whole process was just agonizing over the construction of each individual sentence, and nothing has ever brought me so much joy than doing that. So, and I know I'm still learning and still growing in that process, but yeah, writing short things, but them being slow things to approach, I think is where I feel comfortable now.
I think that you described that writing is possibly one of the best mediums for extracting that flavor. And it made me think all of a sudden. I was like, you know what? Well, obviously you would think like the culinary arts, that's where you get the most flavor. But I think you might be right, because if you just eat a peach, yeah, you might be just like, oh, this is so great. But if you read a paragraph about someone eating a peach, I guarantee you'd probably be savoring that peach a lot more than if you just ate
So true.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the power of really good prose. So, and also, so you referred to the Cernix, and I will put a little blurb on the bottom of this, so that people can access all of the wonderful short stories that you've written. But the Cernix was one of the first stories I read too, and it is just, oh, there's so many layers in it, and it was chilling and frustrating when it ended. I feel like a lot of your themes actually are about relationships. And I'm wondering if there's something you're working out in your own life about. Do you feel like you get to work on yourself a little bit as you're working through these relationships and your characters? How does your writing help you navigate that?
Yeah. It's a central thing for me, for sure. Relationships have always been one of the most important things in my life, and friendships as well as more intimate relationships. But I've been burned multiple times badly, and that's not a bad thing. Obviously they're traumatic at the time. These are difficult things to go through, but I wouldn't be who I was if I hadn't been battered mentally by not necessarily the breaking up of a relationship, but just the process and trauma that for various reasons a couple of particular relationships involved, and one in particular just destroyed any sense of self-confidence that I had in myself. And it took really meeting Joe and us, our sort of burgeoning relationship, to rebuild that. And that took some time. And so I think that I'm sure I'm still processing a lot of that stuff. And I think I'm just naturally drawn to dialogue a lot, and interaction, and just the proximity of that kind of interaction I find fascinating. When I think of films, I remember a key moment of, it was when The Social Network came out, and I was never a fan of Facebook, but I think David Fincher's The Social Network is a brilliant piece of film.
Yeah.
And the opening scene, the dialogue in that opening scene is just incredible. And I remember that was a key moment for me, of thinking, wow, I really want to be able to write the intensity of a scene like that. And so I'm really just drawn to how you can convey, without being explicit, emotions and feelings, and just create tension with minimalism, I suppose. Or more people have said, my prose is often somewhat poetic, and I think I love playing with that space when it comes to relationships as well. So yeah, it's partly just processing relationships from my own experience, but also just wanting to explore what's possible to give the reader an immediacy of intimacy when it comes down to those things. I think that's why I default to the first person. I will write, and I need to write more in the third person, but
I
my
don't think you
default is
do. Why do you say you need to?
well, I suppose as an exploration and
Mm,
trying to be just try, but my default is 100% the first person because I love how confined and claustrophobic it is, and there's
mhm.
just the narrow viewpoints you can get that don't give you everything. To me, that's part of the joy of reading is limited viewpoints.
Well, and I think about similar to like the scenarios that I wrote about in my memoir. If we're putting ourselves back into a situation, even if it's fiction, and we're crafting something that is resembling an emotional charge that we had during a relationship, there's the one of the beautiful things about writing, I think, is that we can put ourselves back there, but we're safe.
Yeah.
And like you described, after this relationship and ended, and you just like you didn't have your self-confidence anymore, that makes me think that there were probably periods of time where you didn't feel safe. And then if you get to kind of put yourself back there but know that you're safe, I
Hmm.
feel like it
Hmm.
does something to our brain, something good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's therapy in a way, I suppose, right? It's a
Mhm.
way of dealing and reliving, even if not directly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But speaking of safety, now you kind of you take it to the next level, because you, like in your first, I think it was your first serialized fiction, Bray's Meteorite. You
Incomplete.
just yeah, exactly.
Work in
Um,
progress. Yeah.
so you decided to write this story without much of a map of how your characters are gonna, or how everything's gonna unfold, including the characters. And actually, I'll just read what you wrote here. You said there's a lot of entries, and I'm not yet sure I truly understand everything that's written within. It's like I still have to piece it all together, map it out, work out which entries go where, how the timeline fits, and if there even is a timeline. And this is your character saying this, but I get the sense is that that was also you, not
Yeah.
knowing where this story will go. And that's a scary talk about, not putting yourself in safety.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. I mean, I have no training as a writer, right? I approach this through pure passion and desire, and I suppose part of that is the thrill that I'm giving myself by not planning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think, and I know through reading about writing from various authors, there's this kind of division, people that plot extensively. And I don't like the opposite term, pantser. I just
What's
bounce
the
off that.
term?
I think pantser, as in you're flying by the seat of your pants.
Oh, God, I've
Um,
never heard that term before.
yeah, I much prefer the first term I heard that it was gardener, and I think George Martin
Mm,
described himself as a gardener, and I think Stephen King as well, where they will plant seeds, but they don't know how the garden is going to grow,
yeah.
and often it's just about embodying and living in with those characters and finding
Mm,
out. And to me, that is it's just exhilarating, that notion that
yeah.
you can have a seed of an idea, um, and then the only way that you can find out where the plot is going to go is by inhabiting those characters and the situation and just writing it and finding out. And that's pretty much how I do everything when I write. Um, and with Bray's Meteorite, I do have an arc. I know where this story is going to go, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
very broad stroke. And I think one of the problems, and to anyone who's read it, thank you for bearing with me because it's a very irregular thing for me to post an entry there. Um, there's an inherent sort of underlying complexity to the story that hasn't really properly come out yet,
Mm,
and that in itself it's just it's quite difficult for me to map out, and it takes a lot. and I'm bad for doing this, sort of flitting between between stories and ideas. I'll get excited about something and then delve into that and maybe leave something else slightly behind. With Bray's Meteorite, particularly just embodying Ren, the protagonist whose diary we are sort of privy to reading. It takes quite a lot to sort of put myself back into that character, and I need to. Yeah, it's one of my goals at the moment is to sort of find some way of getting back to that frequently, and ironing out kinks that I know need to be ironed out. But it's certainly, the Cernox came from an opening paragraph that I scribbled down on my phone one day that just came from nowhere, and then I just wrote. It was a feverish few weeks, and I know Ben Wakeman, whose work I love, recently spoke about this, returning to his current serial, which is incredible. He said that he suddenly just threw himself into it and just wrote and wrote and wrote, and it all just started coming out. And those are the moments that I think every writer wants to experience, when you're not really doing it, you're just being shown it by the characters. So
yeah, it's so thrilling that you put yourself there and Ben puts himself there. I mean, we follow a lot of the similar writers, and I think you're right. You're in the pulse of pure creativity when the story just unfolds before you. So I don't know, pantser, gardener, all I raise my hand and say, I endeavor to be that way. It's certainly how my memoir came out, but that's pretty easy when you're writing. I mean, it's like, this is what happened to me. So it's like the map was already there.
Sure, but the way you did it was pretty special.
So I know that you want to spend more time with your writing. And I think it's interesting because I'm guessing as a writer in science, you have to have a pretty clear map. It's a completely different style that you have to, or a different part of your brain that you have to access when you're doing science writing versus fiction writing. And sometimes you mention in your essays that you're just juggling this research and teaching and this larger sense of self-worth, and your achievements and goals. How even you said that your colleagues are much more unidimensional in their work, and like you said before, they don't even know that you have this other life, and you don't want to live in a unidimensional way. So what is it about your writing life that nurtures something that your career can't? And how do you resolve that tension of not really getting to give this life as much as you want to?
Wish I had the perfect answer for that. It's a constant battle. I think. I know that work is I think I mentioned at the beginning this sort of dual life in a way, right? I work as an academic and I teach, and that's a wonderful career, and I feel very lucky to have found myself in that position. And science is creative. I think one of the reasons I was drawn to science is, I think I have an analytical part of my brain and a creative part of my brain, and they are vying for attention. And sometimes one is ahead of the other, and sometimes the other is clamoring to have more headspace. There is an overlap, and some of that creativity comes in experimental design and how you approach work in science. And I know that does nurture some of that side. But over the years, I've become a little bit more office bound, and teaching, and so I'm less directly in the lab these days. And I don't know. I think I never took it seriously when I was younger that I would really pursue writing properly. But there's always been this burning desire of needing to be creative within me, which is funny because my father is he's retired now, but he was a pharmacist. He trained as a
Mm.
pharmacist and very science minded. To him, fiction is why bother? It's not real. Why bother?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I don't know where it comes from. I mean, there's obviously a blend with my mum and my dad in terms of their interests and likes, but
Mm.
this side of me, I suppose, has felt unique, and
Yeah.
um, I I don't know how to win that battle in my brain. To be honest, there are times when I have to turn to writing to sort of pull back from the intensity of work. And I've been thinking about this as well, because lately I've been finding it a bit harder to find this groove of finding writing time,
Yeah.
and it's that thing of the more you do, the easier it is to do more, that I sometimes find. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that the first part of the year is when I'm busiest with my teaching, and I think there's just something about that period of time where I have less time, but somehow I find more time.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I at the moment things are slowed down a little bit, and I actually ironically find it harder to find writing time. So
Yeah.
I've wavered so much from your original question.
No,
Sorry.
but I love what you're because I think a lot of people can relate to that sense. I mean, even just like I told you, we've been recovering from COVID over here, and
Yeah.
you'd think just laying around for 2 weeks would like, oh my God, I have so many ideas and I want to write, and it's like, no, not me.
Yeah.
There's like,
Yeah.
and I think once the synapses get firing on other projects and you engage with people again, then
Yes.
it creates more energy to do those other things, even though you have less time. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to ask, do your parents know your fiction?
No, and actually, I meant to say that earlier on. No, I've toyed
Wow.
with whether to tell them, and I'm almost thinking about maybe this interview would be the way to go. Hey, I did this. My brother knows. Hi, Sam, if you
Uh-huh.
hear this, and my wife knows, but from sort of family side, no. And it's
Wow.
weird, and again, I don't really know why.
Mm.
Um, I've really struggled to know why, and maybe there's a bit of fear there about fully. I talk about some personal things when I write. Maybe there's a slight barrier there with wanting to just fully express in that manner. Maybe it's
Mm.
because I tend towards darker themes at times, often,
Mm.
that there's a little bit of, I don't know, fear around that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one Joe and we've talked. Sorry, I'm being chased by sunlight. It's a rare,
Oh yeah,
beautiful
no, they're
morning
coming
in
in over
August.
there too.
Yeah, so no, they don't
They
know.
haven't. Would they recognize, so like the Cernix, would they, if they read that and didn't know the author, would they recognize your voice even in
I
it?
don't
Or would,
think so. No,
wow, this is
no.
exciting. I mean, because like you said earlier, there is a bit part of your soul that is emerging in your writing, and an awareness that you have of yourself, and the way that you articulate that through characters is vulnerable. I mean,
Yes,
really
that's a good
vulnerable.
word. Yes, yeah, yeah,
So yeah, to be able to have that witnessed by some of the people in your life is yeah, I'm very curious to hear how that goes.
okay, I'll let you know.
Okay. One of the other things that's cool about you, there's lots of cool things about you, but I love that you were a magician. And I don't want to veer completely off of writing. I want to know how magic and writing are similar for you, because I know nothing about magic other than that it's cool and it's awesome and I'm always fooled. So tell me a little bit if there was an overlap there for you.
Yeah, I think it's that creativity side and a desire to express. Um, but certainly growing up, I got into it in my early teens, but I didn't really begin to take it. I mean, I kept up with it, but it was very much a solo endeavor. I was lucky to get various books and I just spent my time reading, and with this obsessive desire to learn magic, particularly close-up magic, largely card magic. Um, it was an escape for me. It was a way to find some confidence in my teenage self. And when I got to university, that, I think it's cliche to say that you sort of coming out of your shell, but that was certainly the major thing that happened to me going to university. And magic kind of went hand in hand with that, because it was a way almost to put up this sort of pseudo persona, as a slight barrier, but also as a confidence front, I suppose.
Mm.
And then I started working semi-professionally, doing wedding magic, bar magic, that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
which I now look back on and think, wow, I can't believe I did that. Um, but I'm almost certain it's the overlap that comes with that is about ironic. Suppose there is some irony there, that it was both about having a sort of false front, but at the same time it's about being vulnerable, because there is a vulnerability in performing any kind of performance.
Yeah.
And so it allowed me to connect with people. And I love that, I have written a few things about magic, and one of the things that I respect most about good magic is that it's not at all about you, the performer. It's about the audience, and how you
Mm.
can connect and bring a moment of magic, an experience, to an audience. And I think that's the same with writing, right? It's about
Yeah.
how you can create wonder through the written word, is very similar in terms of that feeling of euphoria or movement or sadness that can
Mhm.
be, any performing art can also elicit. So yeah, I think at surface level it's harder to see the connection, but when I really think about it, actually it's all about expression for me.
Yeah, I love how you shared that, and I love how you described magic being more about the audience than the magician. And like I said right when I opened this, you have this magical ability to pull your readers in. I mean, almost hypnotically sometimes, where it's like, why am I so invested in this all of a sudden? And it's, two lines in. Sometimes even I'll buy a book and it'll sit on my bedstand and I can't get through the first chapter for weeks. So, there is a magic trick that you're doing on us. And,
Thank you.
everyone always talks about magic as having the sleight of hand. And I'm wondering too if it's because you're so economical and precise and you deliberate over your sentences that it's also what's being left out
Yeah.
of the what characters are saying,
Yeah.
what they're saying, but what they're not saying. I think there's this skill of yours is being used now as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if there's one thing I strive for, it's that leaving things out, to leaving it up to the reader to read between what's not been said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I know we've got about 10-15 minutes left, and I want to touch on there's other things, there's themes that I haven't even prepared you for, but I know I've commented numerous times about how you animate the inanimate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm loving your story right now, and I can never remember the name of it. The
It's called And It Was Lost, I think.
And it was
Yeah.
lost.
It's not
Yes.
the original title that I had for it,
Okay.
but yes, that's the current title.
So for those listening, and it was lost, there's this stone that has powers beyond what anybody or myself can understand at this point. I want to know the world that you live in. Do you feel, even as you're sitting around your objects at your desk, is there an animism to you, to the world around you? And have you always had that? Or why is that an important part of your writing?
I like the question. No, I don't think it's always been there. I think it's probably part of this finding the soul that we spoke about, and just being more aware of surrounds, and what things are, right? I turned to or maybe I didn't turn to, but I discovered meditation a few years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago, during COVID actually. Um, Sam Harris, who I believe is on Substack now,
Yes, I
through
follow
his
him.
Waking Up app,
Mhm.
and his introductory course that he does on there. I mean, I'd perhaps meditated once or twice before, but it was so eye-opening the way. I mean, I do love the way he speaks, but just the way he constructed that sort of introduction to what meditation is, and just about being present with everything around, and the nature
Mhm.
of consciousness. I suppose some of that comes from just sitting and thinking about everything that's within our view always, and our experience, and how even a stone, even though it's, at least as far as we're aware, not conscious, but how can you embody something with presence that we
Mhm.
don't automatically associate with that? I suppose it's an exploration of that. There's a little bit more, and I guess suppose it's yet to come in the story, that will question a little bit of that,
Mhm.
and provide some ambiguity around those themes. But I think that's, and again, then this is perhaps some of my poorly planned processes. These things kind of have just emerged, and I've gone with them, and have
Yeah.
perhaps they've come arisen subconsciously. But it's only when I sit and think about them that I can identify perhaps why that might have been. But I do think this idea of just trying to always be more present, and huge shout out to Chloe Hope, who's, I know we both love.
Mhm.
Um, Her ability to, in every post she writes, just
Yeah.
make you stop and just mouth it wide open, just be like,
Yeah.
right, yeah, I
Every time, like a
need to,
sermon.
yes, exactly, yeah.
And I'm not religious, but I want, if Chloe started a church, I would
uh,
join.
ditto, yeah.
Also, it reminds me of, and I'm not going to pronounce her last name, but Julie Gabrielli.
Yes,
Gabrielli.
yeah.
She's been encouraging some storytelling from other writers as of late to write fiction from the perspective of something in nature. So the tree is the central character instead of the human being the protagonist. And I there were a few stories that she wrote and then was encouraging other people to do the same. But I love that idea, and if I can share them with you if you haven't
Please
seen
do.
them.
I
But
haven't seen them. I'm sorry, but that sounds
yeah,
fantastic.
I
Yeah,
mean, I just love that idea because most of our stories are human centric, and that's just
yeah,
because we're humans. But to have a stone or a tree actually be the protagonist would be quite lovely.
yeah,
So, and we need more stories like that. And I think you would answer that call really beautifully. So, oh gosh, okay. What do I want to know? What do I want to know? I have a few more here, but I'm going to have to consolidate. We talked a little bit about striking that balance, and I'm kind of coming back to this for personal investment because I'm invested in you continuing to write, and it's you truly are a gift to all of us, and I've just like, oh, I want this to continue. So what advice for yourself and for others would you have on how to well, you talk about how the work life and all of its pressure somehow fuse some seed of creative focus that occasionally grows and blooms. So, how do we keep that seed nurtured, and but without too much pressure so that it dies a slow death?
wish I knew. um I for me at least, it's about regularity.
Mm,
It's about not giving in to the easy path of procrastinating or walking away from something, uh, thinking something's too hard. I'm always, and this shout out to Jo. She's
Mhm.
one for always wanting to push you outside your comfort zone.
Mm,
And I sometimes read writers worry about publishing, do I dare publish this and should I do
mhm,
it? And I would just advocate for just be out of your comfort zone with your writing, right? Be
yeah.
vulnerable, be daring. Um, I think that to me is that burning seed that keeps things going is that desire to just keep pushing and finding
Mm,
where things go. And for me, the on the process, strictly on the process side, regularity is been absolutely key for me. The best
mhm,
times to write for me are first thing in the morning. I love being up early. A cup of coffee when the world is dark and quiet is the
mm,
optimal time for me. And so finding that regularity is how I can try and slot into that creative process. But
mhm.
also just being super aware. I forget the author, and I think we've mentioned it before. Who wrote Big Magic? Did you
Oh, Elizabeth
Elizabeth
Gilbert.
Gilbert? Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, that book speaks about just being attuned to those moments of like you're a writer as an antenna that just ideas waft along and you've got to be
Yeah,
receptive to them. And
yeah.
there have been times when I have just had to stop what I was doing and write a note on my phone for fear that the phrasing that came to me or the
Mhm,
idea will just be lost. And so I think being receptive and attuned to um, the
mm.
world and inspiration and
Yeah.
things that you're passionate about. Yeah, that's what's really important to me. And just not, I get easily get stressed out about work, and just being able to take a step back and see the bigger picture is something that everyone should be doing frequently, I think. So you
Mhm.
should be reading
Yeah.
Chloe Hope for that. So
Yes, you should be reading Chloe Hope with that. And I think everybody is longing for that attention more and more. And I actually, one of the oh, and I'll link it because I'm forgetting the name of her Substack, but she actually sketches and then writes poetry within those sketches. So her Substacks are a little bit more like um, just art installations.
wow,
And
great.
she collects poetry, and she was noticing today that her poetry collection is, or her favorite poets are all about attentiveness.
Yeah,
The Mary Olivers, the David Whites, the John Donahues, the ones that are slowing everything down and paying attention. And
yeah,
she said that sketching for her does a similar thing, where she just has to notice the light and the way that the shadows carving around the leaf. And I think everybody is longing for this in
mm,
our lives in some way. And
yeah.
um,
It's what I mean. Society it's everything's too fast paced now, right?
yeah,
Attention is a tricky thing. So
yeah. So it's how we nurture the seed.
yeah,
And I don't even, this quote, my brother just told me this quote today, and let's make it relevant. I don't even know if it is relevant, but they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And I love that.
great.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, all of this creative energy, whatever it is that we have inside of us, life tries to bury that.
yeah,
And it does bury it. But guess what? They're seeds. And through our attention, through um, courage and vulnerability, we get to watch that grow. And that's what I see you doing. So last question, what's captivating your imagination lately? Is there anything in the works? You have so many projects in the works, but is there anything kind of new spinning around in your brain?
yeah. So I mean, in terms of my reading, I've flitted with this author previously a little bit, but I'm reading a bit of Cormac McCarthy at the moment, and I'm sort of late to come to that, and I'm really fascinated by his ability to write incredibly efficient, sparse prose in a very particular style.
Mm,
And I don't think it's my favorite style, but there's just something about it that intrigues me that I can feel is already beginning to sort of burn away. And so maybe there'll be some exploration of just seeing how, and I'm aware that this happens to me. I'll read an author and I want to explore that author and I want to write in some way, not maybe trying to ape that author, but more as a sort of exercise, I suppose.
Yeah.
And that happened to me with, I'm sure this I mentioned this, the Cernox was heavily inspired by the author of Solenoid, a Romanian author whose name
Hmm.
I'm not, Mircea, begins with a
Yeah.
C, Cartarescu, but I don't know how you really pronounce it. And Kate Waller, we wrote a post about this author who's
Hmm.
incredible. His prose is so rich and fluid and dynamic and extensive, and that was a massive influence on me and continues to be. But I think I'm really curious to know what reading more of Cormac McCarthy will do, just to sort of blend ideas in. So that's
Wow.
inspiring me. The blue sky and the advent of a near spring down here is always, um, I always find so warming and comforting. We don't have it particularly hard down in Australia for winter, but Melbourne tends to get pretty cold and rubbish. But when I can see some flowers already starting to come out and the blue skies appear, it always helps helps me inside. I know.
Mm. Yeah. The changing of the seasons, I think, really does
Yes.
affect
Yeah.
how our creativity flows, what we're chewing on, what we don't want to chew on. I think that really does shift us, subtly, maybe, or maybe not subtly, maybe profoundly.
Yeah.
So, I love that you call yourself that you've not a trained writer, but that you are constantly giving yourself these exercises or these analyses to go through and understand how something is being written. And it seems like you're just on this incredible trajectory, this growth of your own life as a writer. And I am just delighted to have had this hour with you to explore this, because I have a sense in 10 years, I might have to like email you about 30 times before you're like, okay, okay, okay.
Oh, it's such a delight to talk to you, Kimberly. I was so touched when you reached out to want to do this, and I really, really thank you. And I was really worried I was just gonna give you short answers, and we were gonna be sitting at 30 minutes and not sure how to continue. But I worry that I've done the opposite and spoken for
Oh
too
man,
long.
you've been so eloquent. Whoever told you that you're a better writer than a speaker, I think that they live on the same plane for you. I mean, I followed you, and it felt, you speak from the heart too. I really, really was touched by a lot of the things that you shared. So thank you for this, and
Thank you.
I can't wait to hear if your parents are going to be privy to this part of your life. But if they
Yeah.
are, they are very lucky to experience it. So
Thanks so much, Kimberly.
yeah, blessings. Take care.
Thanks. Take
Bye
care.
bye.